Here's a $5 trillion question. Is healthcare a human right? Before you answer, consider that last year the United States federal government spent $1.7 trillion on healthcare. That's money collected from taxpayers under threat of violence. Think about that. And that's just the public expenditure. It doesn't include what you pay privately in health insurance premiums or out-of-pocket costs. That's more than the combined cost of food for everyone in the country for the entire year. Private and government spend. That's all the food grown by every farmer, sold in every grocery store, and served at every restaurant. So does that make healthcare a human right? Well, if you follow the tax dollars, more so than your right to eat or drink. Is that a problem? Shouldn't we make sure everyone has their needs met, including healthcare? Well, it turns out that's a pretty difficult question. We're spending a lot of money, but consensus is that our healthcare system is, well, unhealthy. Budgets are stretched, doctors are burned out, and by most measures we're getting sicker. Sicker than previous generations and sicker than other developed countries. So then, how do we fix this? If healthcare is a human right, do we need to switch to a government healthcare system? That's what our friends are doing to the north and south and east and farther south, basically the entire developed world. Or does America still believe, because we certainly once did, that the invisible hand of free markets can guide us to the economic and social excellence that powers our proverbial city on a hill? In exploring this question, let's get some definitions straight. What is healthcare? And what is a human right? Health is a big concept. Healthcare, on the other hand, is a little more defined. It's the clinical treatment of illness or injury. We're just talking about professional intervention for when you get sick or hurt. That's how the law defines healthcare. So that's simple enough. But if that's healthcare, how can we decide if receiving it is a human right or where it ranks among rights? The basic idea of human rights is that all people have intrinsic worth and that it's a natural crime to oppress or hurt people. Freedom, as we know it, is protection against oppression. And who is it that would oppress you? Well, it might be bandits and criminals, and it might just as likely be government tyrants and their officers. Either way, somebody else is looking to profit from work they didn't perform. Why else would anyone ever oppress others? Unless they were a sadist. The difference is small anyhow. This little issue of people both high and low trying to profit from the work of others is why rights are best protected by the rule of law, which is the idea that no person or group of people deserves preferential treatment under the law. The United States has been the greatest experiment of these ideals that the world has ever seen. A system of government by the people, for the people, to protect and preserve their rights from the powers of anarchy on one hand and tyranny on the other, a balancing act of freedom. These are noble ideals that 10 generations of Americans have fought to preserve and adapt, and the resulting explosion of economic advancement has changed the world forever. Well, gee, that all sounds pretty good. Well, in one sense, it is pretty good. At the same time, Ronald Reagan said it well.
You and I have lived too long with this miracle to properly be appreciative. Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction. It is not ours by way of inheritance. It must be fought for and defended constantly by each generation, for it comes only once to a people. And those in world history who have known freedom and then lost it have never known it again.
So, it falls to us to reassess the meaning of freedom and human rights in our own generation. And it turns out we have more than a little bit of disagreement about what defines even our most basic rights. How could this be? Is it really so hard to agree on what is right? Well, it turns out, yes. That's why peace and prosperity is such a fragile thing and always has been across history. So where does healthcare fit into this conversation exactly? To understand that, it helps to break rights up into two categories: negative rights and positive rights. Negative rights assume that if you have a right, it's your individual responsibility to pursue it. The role of government is limited to protecting that pursuit, not to guaranteeing its success. Positive rights, on the other hand, institutionalize the definition of quality of life in a top-down manner, and the purpose of government is to actively deliver people their rights. The issue with trying to deliver things from the top down is, even though we all agree that we want peace and prosperity, we don't even close to agree on how these things should look. If each individual has the right to pursue prosperity, as with negative rights, as long as they don't infringe on others' ability to do the same, some difference of opinion isn't a problem. In fact, it's a good thing. In contrast, if you try to centralize ideology to a small group of decision makers, your odds of finding great solutions go way down. It also opens the door for questionable characters to promise easy top-down solutions to our problems in order to buy political influence. They use the idea of positive human rights, the idea that we need global policy consensus on food, housing, healthcare, and eventually pretty much everything else, which of course requires tax policy to ensure these rights are equitably distributed for the greater good. Remember, if you're going to collect taxes and enforce policy, you're necessarily going to do it under threat of violence. The problem is, everything is made up of just people. It turns out putting all the power into the hands of a few, now well-armed and well-funded people doesn't automatically make our disagreements less explosive. By extreme contrast, with negative human rights, these disagreements are less of a problem. Negative rights would have you, the individual, determine what is a meaningful life and work cooperatively with others to make that happen. Voluntarily. The rule of law exists to ensure the right to pursue those things isn't taken from you by force. You work out the finer details beyond that. The government is still there, and yes, they still have an army, but the scope of their decision making is significantly smaller. The United States was founded using this negative rights approach. The primary purpose of our founding documents was to limit the power of government thoughtfully, for the reasons we just discussed, but to still allow for order and justice. But politics is tough. Wars, famines, plagues, they create a lot of demand on leaders to roll out quick fixes, which always increases the scope of government infrastructure. Besides this natural pressure to expand government, the Industrial Revolution brought to us wealth the world had never known. And if you have wealth, you can bet your bottom dollar you have lobbyists to keep it safe. There's no better way for big business to hedge up the way for competition than by sponsoring expensive, petty regulation in the name of consumer protection. These are formidable pressures, but if you really want to see change in the political landscape, what you need is a good crisis. How about a couple of world wars? Maybe a financial crisis sandwiched in between? It turns out that's exactly what we got. And by 1948, we were good and ready to leave negative rights behind in favor of a brave new world order. That's the year the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights was passed, and shifted the global view of human rights to a positive rights view forever. In just the second paragraph of the preamble, the UN flag is staked in positive rights, declaring the purpose of this document is to help achieve a world free from fear and want. Well, what's wrong with that? Who wants to experience fear or want? Well, you might consider for a moment what it would take for fear and want to be removed from your existence, as if governments can remove core elements of our nature anyhow. So that was just from the preamble. If we move into the actual articles in the Declaration of Human Rights, Articles 1 through 21 contain negative rights. All people have a right to life, speech, family, political participation, and property, not to be infringed by private parties or government powers. Then there's a big change at Article 22. Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to Social Security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality. Can you see the conflict and unbelievable complexity of delivering this from the top down? Did you even understand what it said? How will a member of society get access to state resources unless the state has taken those resources by force from other sovereign citizens? What is the full development of one's personality? How will the state decide if that's being achieved? What if you disagree with the state's definition? Who will decide if this right is being delivered to your children? We are all watching questions like these play out on the world stage. Interesting to note, after the turn at Article 21, the articles never look back to negative rights. Included in the remaining rights are free choice of employment, no qualifying requirements presented, income supplemented if necessary by social protection, no specification on what necessary means, leisure and paid vacation time, adequate standard of living, no specification for what adequate is, equal social experience for children born in or out of wedlock, free education to the end of the full development of the human personality, free enjoyment of arts and sharing in scientific advancement, incredibly followed by a clause that proclaims that artists have the right to protect their work, even though though everyone else has a right to its free enjoyment. It's not that these things aren't desirable. It's what happens when you turn them into rights to be decided and delivered by the state. It turns out we learn best by having many experiments. We are very often poor judges of what will work or even what is actually desirable. When we suffer the consequences of our ignorance, it helps accelerate our learning. You might even say that it's the only way we truly learn, by iterating through this painful process. We remove that pain at our peril. Besides the fact that we need to struggle to be our best selves, there are also fatal technical challenges to enforcing laws and policies based on positive rights. For example, if you have chickens and your neighbor comes to ask if they can borrow some eggs, and you scream thief and gash their head open with a kitchen knife, we can all agree that this is not desirable behavior. We are probably all willing to agree to be subject to punishment if we decide to stab our unarmed neighbor with a kitchen knife. But how about a slightly different scenario? What if your neighbor comes over after having their head gashed open by a kitchen knife, not by you, asking for help, and you say, "I have chickens to feed, this is not my problem." Then they bleed to death on your porch. We can all agree you acted immorally. We can all possibly even agree something criminal has occurred. However, this represents a positive right situation. You have not impeded your neighbor's right to life, rather, you failed to actively deliver life-saving help to them. The question isn't whether you should help. The question is how to develop a law around this. It is extremely difficult. What will it say? When someone is in life-threatening need, if you do not provide them with help, you are an accessory to their death. We have such laws. They have led to many tragically messy cases. What happens if you deliver help incompetently and make things worse? People have been charged and convicted in just such circumstances. Beyond a dire emergency like bleeding to death on your porch, what about issues of even greater complexity like equality or security? How about a chicken example? Let's say you have chickens and your neighbor is a little low on food. You might be a good neighbor and help them out with some eggs. However, if they have a right to your eggs as a matter of social security, well, the only happy outcome in that scenario is the one where you were willing to give your neighbor some eggs anyhow. Every other outcome ends in spite and abuse. Plus, the goodwill is sucked out of every outcome, including the best one. If we have to make laws to enforce moral good, if we could even agree on what that is, where are we as a society anyhow? Laws have far-reaching implications. Building them around positive rights is a treacherous practice. We haven't really discussed the ever-present danger of corruption in government. We haven't begun to talk about the inefficiency of government administration or the grossly bloated laws and regulations surrounding everyday matters in this country. We're only talking about the practical impossibility of writing laws that enforce people's right to a life free of fear and want. When governments enforce ideals, the consequences from any mistakes are delayed, and the policymakers are buffered from the impact because the impact is spread out to all of us. We tolerate this because public opinion is easily swayed and central powers are far removed from the individuals who make up their populace. Remember, even absent corruption, the law of history is unintended consequences. That's why a significant danger to a happy society is the type of person who wakes up and says, "I know what will make everyone happier. We need laws to enforce my ideas," with all the confidence of God. We are now experiencing the type of delayed collective consequences we've been describing here. We're carrying generations of bloated social programs, and we're struggling to catch our breath. How about we conclude back where we began, asking how healthcare fits into our list of human rights? Let's say we live in a negative rights society. We nearly all agree that allowing the disadvantaged to die helpless in the streets because the law doesn't require us to intervene indicates we've arrived in hell. Likewise, if we live in a positive rights society, we nearly all agree that allowing an able person to sit at home eating only potato chips and watching television and have both the potato chips and the impending healthcare at the expense of everyone else indicates we've arrived in hell. Wait, so then have we arrived in hell? Possibly, but only in part. There's still hope. Making a decision about which type of society we want to live in is our collective right. That's what the Declaration of Independence is all about. When we should be concerned is when the question isn't being presented honestly. Positive rights have a lot of appeal to people's empathy. It could be said that advocates of positive rights are especially compassionate. So compassionate, they would actually give you the shirt off their neighbor's back. The problem is someone has to pay for that shirt no matter what. We don't want anyone to go without, and we don't want people who refuse to contribute or manipulate the system to have a free ride at our expense, because that doesn't help them either. And generationally, it's devastating. We have no shortage of examples of what multi-generational government assistance does to communities. We have no shortage of overly complex regulations in the name of consumer protection that mean only companies with teams of attorneys can compete in certain industries, like every industry. Complex laws are a very wicked thing. If we the people are not virtuous enough to work out solutions for our neighbors who find themselves in some medical misfortune, from where will we extract our political saviors who are pure enough to craft laws and erect enforcement agencies to save us from ourselves? If free markets allow the superintelligent psychopaths among us to put us all in involuntary servitude to their greedy empire, what government weaponry will we build that will be out of reach for these psychopaths to buy and manipulate? Remember, historical examples of people using government power to broadly abuse human rights flow thick as blood. Even where private corporations are the abusers, nothing solidifies their advantage more than complex regulation and expensive legal processes. Rather than seeking to solve our problems through coercion and enforcement, we can build meaningful, private, local-first solutions. Local first benefits doctors who have an appetite to work more directly with their patients, less encumbered by systems and processes. Nobody is happy about rising healthcare costs, but the actual physicians who treat us get a smaller share of our unhappy medical spend every year. This is bad for patients and for the quality of our physicians, but on the bright side, good for shareholders of health insurers and administrators. Yay, capitalism! Local First also benefits researchers who want to look for meaningful scientific advancement without having to arrange how the outcome will serve a corporate interest before the research even begins, which they do because of the enormous regulatory expense of research. Our current research is all pointed in the best interest of a small number of companies who can fund it. That's not a good setup for science. If the state is sovereign, we are all just clocking in to ensure its citizens are served the rights that the supreme leader benevolently decides that they have. The rule of law is going to struggle in this scenario, and it is struggling increasingly. If individuals are sovereign, they can reap the fruit of choosing to cooperate to collectively pursue a meaningful and prosperous social order. The issue is we have not lived up to this opportunity. Our slavish and greedy natures have too often dominated our interactions and economics. The power void we have left has been filled by spiteful laws, corrupt regulators, and injured communities. These have not been imposed upon us. They are a reflection of us. When they aren't, their power over us will disappear. These are not reasons to give up. Government power cannot cure us of these ailments. Personal responsibility and cooperative efforts and experiments can. May God grant us the vision to live up to our birthright through iteration. Healthcare, to a great extent, is currently enforced as a human right in the United States and throughout the developed world. The laws, policies, and funding say so, and they are trending more in that direction all the time. But maybe we will see the wisdom in pursuing it as a privilege and opportunity instead. What does that look like? The personal choice to go jogging tomorrow morning is the proverbial first step. Rejecting the idea that an easy pill will make up for any unattended responsibilities is the whole solution. We need organizations who see the empty future of opting for top-down solutions and invest in the rich soil of local relationships. National insurance networks and quasi-government insurance carriers have controlled the cost and delivery of healthcare for long enough. The first step in taking it back is as simple as a small private business forming a relationship with a small private physician team who will work to create just one single effective small group health plan, rather than curing cancer, racism, world hunger, and obesity with the same sweeping policy. We can chip away at this iteratively through experiments, voluntary cooperation, and the joy of meaningful work.